Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating case of strategic resilience. We're looking at India's response to some pretty significant pressure from the United States. Some people have even called it the India won't bow doctrine. Our mission here is to understand how India handled this trade challenge. It seems like they used, well, a kind of masterclass in diplomacy and economic agility, not just giving in.
Exactly. You'll discover how India really stood firm. We've got a stack of compelling sources here. They detail the U.S. punitive tariffs and then India's multi-pronged counter strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. So first, the pressure India was under. What specifically happened?
Well, the sources show the U.S. hit India with a staggering 50% punitive tariff on exports.
50%? Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't just, about the trade numbers. The Trump administration explicitly linked it to India still buying Russian crude oil.
So framing it politically.
Right. Using it as a tool to pressure Moscow, but also to kind of question India's alignment, its loyalty.
And was that tariff rate unusual?
That's what's really striking here. It was quite disproportionate. India and Brazil got 50%. Compare that to, say, 30% for China, or just 15% for Japan and South Korea.
That does suggest something more than just trade disputes.
It strongly suggests it was a tool of political coercion, yeah. And maybe extending beyond just the Russian oil issue, possibly also about India's resistance to opening up certain markets like agriculture and dairy.
Okay, so what was the actual impact in India?
Well, macroeconomically, the hit to GDP was projected maybe 0.5, 0.6%. Seems limited, right?
On the surface, yeah.
But the blow was actually highly concentrated. It was devastating for certain labor-intensive sectors. We're talking textiles, gems and jewelry, auto parts, and especially shrimp exports.
Affecting real people, lots of jobs.
Millions of workers, small businesses. And on top of that, there was this emerging threat, to India's really vital IT and services sector from some proposed U.S. legislation.
Okay, that's definitely a lot of pressure. So how did India respond? You said multi-pronged, not direct retaliation.
Exactly. No tit-for-tat tariffs. Instead, it was this mix of assertive diplomacy, proactive engagement, and really focusing on their own domestic strengths. The foundation really was India's long-standing principle of strategic autonomy.
Meaning they chart their own course.
Basically, yeah. Asserting their freedom of action in this, multipolar world, not being just a client state of any single power.
So how did that play out diplomatically?
A key moment was the External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, visiting Moscow. Now, it wasn't overtly confrontational, but his calls for more engagement with Russian firms, talking about diversifying trade.
Sending a message?
A clear signal, yeah. Subtle but powerful, showing that India's foreign policy wasn't going to be dictated by Washington. Plus, there were sophisticated lobbying efforts in D.C., the Indian-American diaspora got involved, advocating for the partnership, and eventually our sources report a kind of thaw in ties, even the revival of a big $4 billion Boeing P-8I aircraft deal.
Wow. Okay, so a very sophisticated diplomatic game.
Yeah.
But what about shoring things up at home, the internal defenses?
Oh, right. Simultaneously, they were boosting their own economic engines. This whole Atmanirbhar Bharat policy, self-reliant India.
Yes, I've heard that.
The idea was to reduce external dependency, promote self-sufficiency. And they could lean on India's really strong domestic consumption. It's a massive 61% of their GDP.
So leveraging their internal market.
Exactly. And then came this really brilliant economic counterpunch, the GST 2.0 reform.
The goods and services tax. How did that work as a countermeasure?
Well, instead of hitting back with tariffs, they overhauled their own indirect tax system. They consolidated tax slabs basically from 4 down to just 2, 5%, and 18%, and slashed rates on hundreds of everyday items.
So stimulating their own economy.
Precisely. A calculated move to boost domestic demand, offset those potential export losses. Projections were it could add, maybe 30 basis points, 0.3% to GDP that fiscal year. It was even framed politically as a Diwali bonanza for voters.
Clever. That is clever. Fighting external pressure by strengthening the internal base. What about the longer-term picture, beyond the immediate crisis?
Yeah, good point. This forward-thinking economic strategy tied into a long-term vision. Diversification. The U.S. tariffs basically gave them the push, the urgency, to accelerate diversifying their export markets.
Moving beyond traditional partners.
Right. The Commerce Ministry is now expanding its target list for new markets way beyond the usual suspects, from 20 countries up to 50. They're focusing particularly on the Middle East and Africa. The goal is making India less vulnerable to these kinds of politically motivated trade actions in the future.
So bringing this all together for you listening, whether you're prepping for a meeting on global trade or just find this stuff fascinating,
Right.
what's the key takeaway?
I think this deep dive really shows a critical principle, especially in today's world. It shows that non-retaliatory economic moves combined with smart multi-vector diplomacy can actually be a more effective way to handle external pressure than just getting into direct trade wars. It's a powerful lesson in strategic resilience, really. How a nation, even under intense pressure, can assert its sovereignty, protect its interests, and strengthen itself internally without, capitulating.
Absolutely fascinating. A real masterclass, as you said.
And it raises, I think, an important question for you to consider, just to mull over. How do nations effectively balance these crucial global partnerships with a really resolute commitment to their own independent national interests, especially in the complex, interconnected world we live in today?